A millionaire accidentally discovered a female cleaning lady asleep on the toilet of the men's restroom in his hotel. He immediately went straight to the girl's manager and... Charlie Coleman wasn't expecting to find someone asleep in the men's restroom, especially when it is a young girl. The stall door was slightly ajar, enough for him to notice the still figure inside. He hesitated for half a second before pushing it open, revealing the sight before him. A young woman in a hotel uniform, slumped over the toilet lid, arms folded under her head, deep in sleep. His first thought was disbelief. Of all places, in the middle of her shift, she had chosen here. But as he stood there, watching her breathe steadily, his irritation faded into something more ambiguous. She was completely unaware, lost in the kind of sleep that came only from exhaustion, the kind that left no room for self-consciousness or control. He recognized it. He had lived it. Charlie exhaled, rubbing his temple. He should wake her up. If another manager found her like this, she could be in serious trouble. But instead, after a moment's pause, he stepped back, took the restroom under maintenance sign from the hallway, and placed it outside. No one would disturb her now. As he turned away, his gaze landed on her name tag, Diane Warren. He let the name settle in his mind before stepping out of the restroom, leaving the heavy silence behind. The hallway outside felt oddly quiet. Charlie walked, his pace unhurried, though his mind wasn't. His days were filled with meetings, reports, and more conversations about numbers than he cared to count. Yet this fleeting moment, stuck with him. He had built this hotel from the ground up, not with his own hands, not in the literal sense, but in the way that mattered. Every decision, every detail, every inch of polished marble and gold trim bore his name. It was his responsibility, his legacy, and his burden. And yet, here he was, thinking about a cleaning staff member asleep on a toilet lid. It wasn't the absurdity of it that unsettled him. It was the quiet familiarity. He knew what that looked like because he saw it every morning in his own mirror. His life had never been simple, despite what outsiders assumed. The Coleman family name had weight, expectations stitched into every thread of his existence. His father had been relentless, a man who built empires and expected his son to do the same. Growing up, Charlie had learned that rest was weakness, that success demanded sacrifice, and that every moment spent not working was a moment wasted. For years, he had lived by that rule. He still did. But sometimes, like tonight, he wondered at what cost. He reached the executive floor, passing by the wide glass windows that overlooked the city. The skyline stretched out before him, glittering under the weight of night, each light representing another business, another ambition, another restless soul chasing something just out of reach. He could still hear his father's voice. "If you slow down, someone else will take your place." Charlie scoffed under his breath. The old man wasn't even around anymore, yet the words lingered like an echo that refused to fade. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him back. A reminder flashed on the screen, meeting with investors at 9 a.m. Another long day ahead. He pinched the bridge of his nose, already exhausted by tomorrow. Turning a corner, he saw the manager's office and paused. Kathleen was inside, flipping through reports. Charlie knocked once, stepping in before she could fully look up. "Mr. Coleman," she greeted, straightening immediately. "Is something wrong?" Charlie leaned against the doorway, keeping his tone casual. "Restroom near the executive lounge," he said. "Just checked in. Looked like it took a while to clean. Big space, tough job. Maybe ease up on whoever's assigned to it." Kathleen blinked, slightly caught off guard. Yes, of course. I'll keep that in mind." He nodded, pushing off the doorframe. "Appreciate it." And just like that, he left. By the time Charlie reached his suite, the exhaustion had settled deep into his bones. His penthouse was quiet, untouched since he had left that morning. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city, but he didn't spare them a glance. He kicked off his shoes, unbuttoned his shirt at the collar, and sat down on the edge of his bed, running a hand through his hair. He should have felt relief. The workday was over. But instead, there was an odd, lingering heaviness, not just from himself, but from what he had seen. Diane Warren, fast asleep in a restroom, too tired to even make it back to the staff lounge. Charlie wasn't naive. He knew employees worked long hours, especially in a place like this, but seeing it, really seeing it, was different from reading it on a report. He thought of her hands, how they must have scrubbed marble floors and polished mirrors until exhaustion claimed her. He thought of the way she had curled into herself, seeking rest wherever she could find it. It was ridiculous how that moment wouldn't leave his mind, but maybe it wasn't ridiculous at all. The faint hum of fluorescent lights filled the empty restroom, a distant buzz against the heavy silence. The air was still, thick with the lingering scent of industrial cleaner. A muffled voice echoed from outside the door. Someone passing by, their footsteps quick, fading down the hall. Diane Warren stirred. A slow inhale, a shift of weight. The uncomfortable press of stiff polyester fabric against her skin. Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the dim lighting. Her head ached, the kind of dull, lingering pain that came from sleeping in the wrong position. It took her a second to register her surroundings, the cold tile beneath her knees, the mop leaning against the wall, the cleaning supplies scattered in the cart nearby. Her breath caught. She pushed herself up too quickly, her pulse spiking as realization crashed over her. She had fallen asleep. Here, in the men's restroom. Panic set in. Her gaze darted around, expecting someone to be standing there, arms crossed, waiting to reprimand her. But the room was empty. Just the quiet hum of the air vents and her own ragged breathing. Then she saw it. A sign stood near the entrance. Restroom under maintenance. Diane frowned. That hadn't been there before. She was sure of it. Her hands moved instinctively, straightening her uniform, smoothing the creases as if that could erase the evidence of what had just happened. Her mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Had someone seen her? If a supervisor found out? If Kathleen found out? No. No time to dwell. She needed to move. She grabbed the mop, threw the remaining supplies back into the cart, and forced her legs to work. Each step toward the exit felt like a test, like at any moment someone might stop her, demand answers. But when she finally pushed through the door and into the hallway, the world outside remained the same, unbothered, oblivious. The sign. The untouched silence. Someone had covered for her. The subway ride home was quiet, the rhythmic sway of the train lulling the exhausted city into a fragile stillness. Diane clutched her bag close, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the worn edges of the strap. Her mind was still stuck on that sign. Who had put it there? Whoever it was, they had made sure she wasn't caught. A small part of her wanted to believe it was an act of kindness. But the more rational side of her, the side shaped by years of scraping by, of knowing that kindness was rarely free, told her not to think too much of it. By the time she reached her stop, her limbs felt like lead. The apartment smelled faintly of soap and leftover pasta. Terry was curled up on the couch, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the TV. He looked up the second she walked in, his expression shifting between relief and mild disapproval. "You're late," he muttered, not bothering to pause his game. Diane kicked off her shoes, already feeling the exhaustion settle into her bones. "Bus took forever." Terry's lips twitched. "Or you were busy secretly moonlighting as a superhero, cleaning toilets by day, fighting crime by night." Diane snorted, making her way to the kitchen. She opened the fridge, scanning the contents. Half a carton of milk, some eggs, rice in a plastic container. Not much, but enough. "You hungry?" she asked, pulling out what she could. Terry sat up, stretching his arms behind his head. "I ate, but I won't say no to food." "You never do," she shot back, flicking on the stove. They fell into an easy rhythm, Diane moving through the small space with practiced efficiency, Terry filling the quiet with half-hearted commentary on his game. It was familiar, safe, but beneath the usual banter, something lingered. A heaviness that neither of them fully acknowledged. Terry was the first to break the unspoken weight. "I saw the rent notice today," he said, voice careful. Diane's hands didn't falter, but something in her posture stiffened. "I've got it covered," she replied, stirring the pan. Terry didn't argue, but she could feel his gaze on her. "You always say that." "Because it's true." A pause. Then, softer. "I wish you didn't have to do this alone." Diane exhaled slowly. She turned, leaning against the counter, crossing her arms. "You're 10, Terry. You don't have to worry about this stuff." "I'm almost 11. She rolled her eyes. "Oh, well, that changes everything." But the teasing didn't quite mask the real weight of the conversation. Terry knew, he always knew, no matter how much she tried to shield him from it. He sat up properly now, pushing his game aside. "If Mom and Dad were here..." Diane cut him off before he could finish. "They're not." Silence. She regretted how sharp it sounded. But some wounds never quite closed, and reopening them now wouldn't change anything. Terry swallowed, then nodded. "Yeah, I know." She sighed, ruffling his hair on her way back to the stove. "I'm fine, Terry. I promise." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push further. A few minutes later, they sat together, eating in tired contentment. The apartment was small, the furniture second-hand, the weight of responsibility far heavier than it should be for someone her age. But in this moment, it was enough. As the night stretched on, Terry yawned, his head eventually resting against her arm. Diane didn't move, just let him lean against her, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breathing. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and do it all again. But for now, in this quiet, dimly lit apartment, she let herself rest. A new working day has begun. The city outside pulsed with the low hum of late afternoon, a mix of distant car horns, muffled conversations, and the rhythmic footsteps of guests moving through the hallways of the hotel. Diane adjusted the strap of her cleaning cart, exhaling slowly before she swiped her keycard against the door of the VIP suite. The room was pristine, as expected, but a faint indentation in the plush carpet hinted that its occupant had only recently left. She worked efficiently, following the checklist ingrained in her mind: strip the bed, replace the linens, wipe down surfaces, restock the minibar. The silence was almost meditative, broken only by the occasional rustling of fabric and the soft clinking of glass as she placed everything back in order. Then she saw it. An expensive-looking watch sat on the desk near the window, its polished metal catching the late afternoon light. Diane hesitated. It was a heavy kind of wealth, the kind of item that could pay her rent for months, but she didn't dwell on the thought. Quickly, she picked it up, inspecting the back for any engraving, any indication of who it belonged to. Nothing. Her fingers curled around it as she moved toward the door. She knew the drill. Items like these had to go straight to lost and found, logged and locked away. No exceptions. Just as she reached for the doorknob, the door swung open. A man stepped inside. Tall, dark suit, sharp features, the kind of presence that shifted the air without trying. Diane's breath caught. For a brief moment, she only registered his eyes, cool, unreadable, assessing. Then her gaze flickered down to the watch in her palm, and something unspoken clicked between them. "I believe that belongs to me," he said, his voice smooth but carrying an unmistakable authority. Diane stiffened. She hadn't expected to run into the guest who left it behind, much less this kind of guest. He didn't look impatient, but there was something in the way he regarded her, calm, yet measured, that made her straighten on instinct. "I was just about to take it to Lost and Found," she said, keeping her tone polite but firm. The corner of his mouth lifted, but whether it was amusement or something else, she couldn't tell. "You don't have to go through all that trouble." He extended a hand, waiting. Diane hesitated. Protocol was clear: Lost and Found. No handing items directly to guests unless explicitly told otherwise by management. And yet, standing in front of him, she felt the weight of the moment. "I'd prefer to follow procedure," she said finally. Something flickered in his gaze. She expected him to argue. Most wealthy guests would. Instead, he simply studied her, as if she had just done something unexpectedly interesting. Then, his head tilted slightly. "You're new." Diane blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "I don't recognize you," he continued. "You weren't on staff the last time I stayed here." She bristled slightly at the assumption that he knew every employee personally, but kept her expression neutral. "I started a few months ago," she replied, still gripping the watch. There was a pause. Then, as if testing something, he switched languages. "Hablas español?" The shift was so abrupt that for a split second, Diane almost didn't process it. But instinct took over before logic caught up. "Sí, lo hablo," she answered without missing a beat. His expression didn't change, but there was a spark of something behind his eyes. Then, just as easily, he switched again, this time to Mandarin. Diane responded fluently, then French. By the time she finished the last sentence, the silence between them had shifted. There was no mistaking it now. He was interested. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in the way of a man who had just uncovered something unexpected in an otherwise predictable day. "That's impressive," he said, slipping effortlessly back into English. Diane swallowed, suddenly aware of how tightly she was holding the watch. "I just picked up a few languages over the years." He didn't push. Instead, he held out his hand again, this time with a look that almost dared her to hand it over. Before she could decide, the door opened again. Kathleen's voice was sharp with authority before she even fully stepped inside. "Mr. Coleman, Diane turned to her so fast she almost missed it. The name. Her heart stumbled. Kathleen was already inclining her head in a way that made everything click. The formal stance, the immediate deference, the way her voice adjusted with the kind of respect that wasn't just for a guest. Charlie Coleman, CEO owner. Diane froze. The watch in her hand suddenly felt 1,000 times heavier. She had been arguing protocol with the owner of the hotel. Charlie, to his credit, didn't seem bothered. In fact, there was a ghost of a smirk at the edge of his mouth, as if he had been waiting for the moment it all clicked for her. "Ms. Warren," Kathleen's voice sliced through the tension, crisp and professional. "I assume you were returning Mr. Coleman's watch." Diane snapped back into focus. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to nod, quickly placing the watch onto the desk, not his hand, just in case. "I apologize," she said, feeling the weight of every syllable. "I didn't know who you were, sir." She braced for it. The reprimand, the inevitable job-ending mistake. But Charlie just slid his watch back onto his wrist, adjusting it like the entire interaction had been nothing more than a casual exchange. Then he looked at Kathleen. "She follows the rules," he said. Kathleen immediately nodded. "She does, sir." There was a beat of silence before Charlie's gaze returned to Diane, considering her for a second longer than necessary. "Move her to the front desk," he said finally. Diane's breath hitched. Kathleen blinked. "Sir?" "She's wasted on housekeeping," Charlie said smoothly. "Let's see how she does with guests." Diane stared. Was this happening? She opened her mouth to protest, to say something, anything, but no words came out. Charlie glanced at her one last time before heading for the door. "See you around, Ms. Warren." And just like that, He was gone. The hallway near the employee lounge was quiet, the faint murmur of hotel activity humming in the background. Diane stood just outside, her phone pressed against her ear, her fingers gripping it so tightly she barely noticed. "Terry, you won't believe this," she said, her voice breathless with excitement. On the other end, there was a pause, then a dramatic gasp. "Did you finally get promoted to Queen of the Hotel?" Diane rolled her eyes, but the grin on her face didn't fade. "Close. I'm moving to the front desk. Reception." A beat of silence, then a loud cheer. "No way!" Terry practically shouted. Diane laughed, shifting her weight from foot to foot, the sheer joy of the moment making her giddy. "Yes way. Kathleen just told me. It's official. I start tomorrow." Terry made some kind of celebratory sound, something between a whoop and a victory dance, before he said, "This means you won't smell like bleach all the time anymore." "Oh, shut up," Diane said, but she was laughing. "We're celebrating tonight. I'll bring home your favorite, extra large hamburger, no onions." Terry gasped dramatically. "This is the best day of my life." Diane let out another laugh, unable to contain the overwhelming lightness in her chest. A few feet away, half hidden near the hallway's edge, Charlie Coleman watched. He hadn't meant to linger. He had only been passing through. But something about the way Diane's face lit up, unguarded, free, made him stop. She was interesting, more than he had realized. The hotel lobby hummed with the quiet elegance of wealth, the soft murmur of conversations, the faint clinking of glasses from the lounge, the distant chime of the front desk phone. The air carried the crisp scent of fresh lilies, strategically placed in polished vases along the marble counters. Diane stood behind the reception desk, her fingers still curled around the fabric of her blazer, as if grounding herself in reality. It had been 3 days since her unexpected promotion. 3 days, and she still felt like she had stepped into the wrong life. The moment Kathleen had informed her of the transition, she had been convinced it was a mistake, some kind of misunderstanding that would be revoked before she even had time to settle in. But no, the papers had been signed, her name added to the employee roster under front desk reception. Diane had barely processed it before the real work began. The training was brief, more of a crash course than a proper introduction. Most of it she already knew, years of silently absorbing information, of watching and learning from a distance. What she hadn't accounted for was the difference in presence. As a cleaner, she had been invisible. As a receptionist, she was seen. It was a strange shift. The uniform was neater, the expectations higher, and the mistakes more visible. But she adapted. She had to. And then there was him. Charlie Coleman had not spoken to her since that moment in the VIP suite, but she knew he had been watching. It was never obvious, never inappropriate, but she could feel it. A glance when passing by, a brief pause in conversation when she handled an interaction particularly well. She didn't know what to make of it. She was still trying to understand why he had pushed for this promotion in the first place. A small beep on the screen in front of her pulled her back to the present. She straightened, adjusting her posture as she welcomed an arriving guest, a well-dressed woman with luggage that looked more expensive than Diane's entire paycheck. Polite, professional, smooth. It was almost too easy to fall into this role. Charlie watched from the mezzanine above the lobby, his hand resting lightly against the iron railing. He hadn't planned to observe her. Not intentionally, at least. But from where he stood, he could see everything. The seamless way she had adjusted to her new role, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence even when she thought no one was watching. She was sharp, quick on her feet. There was a precision in the way she spoke to guests, a careful attentiveness that was impossible to fake. And yet beneath the professionalism, he could still see the lingering exhaustion in her movements. She didn't show it, not outright. But he knew the look of someone running on borrowed time. Later that evening, after finishing her shift, Diane slipped into the break room, exhaustion settling into her bones. She grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and leaned against the counter, letting out a slow breath. The past few days had been a whirlwind, learning reservation systems, handling demanding guests, not messing up. She closed her eyes for a brief second, only opening them when she heard a quiet rustle behind her. On the table sat a cup of coffee, untouched, with a neatly wrapped croissant beside it. Diane frowned. It wasn't hers. She hadn't bought anything. Her gaze flickered around the room, but no one else was there. The usual staff had either left or were on shift. She hesitated before reaching for it. The coffee was still warm. Her gift? She glanced toward the doorway, but the hotel beyond remained untouched, its usual rhythm undisturbed. Charlie stood near the far end of the lobby, partially hidden by a marble column. He hadn't planned on lingering. In fact, he had barely given himself permission to care. But when he had walked past the break room and noticed the slight slump in Diane's shoulders, the familiar weight of exhaustion settling over her, he had found himself pausing. It wasn't much. A small gesture. A cup of coffee. A pastry. Something to ease the edges of whatever weight she carried. She would never know it was him. And for now, that was enough. Is this the cutest couple you've heard about this week? If so, leave a wedding comment below. The city was caught between night and dawn, the streets bathed in the muted glow of flickering streetlights. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of damp pavement and lingering exhaust fumes from the occasional passing car. Diane stood at the empty bus stop, shifting her weight from foot to foot, her breath curling in small clouds before her. It was too early for the usual rush of workers, too late for the lingering nightlife crowd. Just silence, an unfamiliar kind, unsettling in its stillness. She rolled her shoulders, trying to shake off the exhaustion settling deep into her muscles. The night shift few days at the front desk had been relentless, long hours, demanding guests, and the constant pressure of being seen. It was different from housekeeping, the scrutiny, the expectations. But it was a step forward, even if it felt like she was barely keeping up. Her fingers curled into her coat sleeves for warmth. Where was the damn bus? A sleek black car rolled to a slow stop in front of her, headlights cutting through the dim morning haze. The window lowered. Diane? The voice was smooth, steady, too familiar. Her stomach dipped. Charlie Coleman. Dressed in his usual sharp suit, but with the faintest looseness to his posture, like the weight of the night had settled on him too. His gaze flickered over her, unreadable, before landing on the empty street behind her. It's too early to be out here alone. Diane swallowed, gripping the strap of her bag. I'm waiting for the bus. Charlie exhaled, glancing briefly at the vacant road ahead before turning back to her. It won't be here for at least another half hour. She frowned. You don't know that. He arched a brow. I own the hotel, Diane. I know the bus schedule. She hated that he had a point. A beat of silence stretched between them before he leaned slightly against the window, fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel. Get in. I'll drop you home. Diane hesitated. There were 100 reasons to say no. It was unnecessary. It was crossing some invisible line. And above all, it was Charlie Coleman. But it was also freezing, and her limbs ached from standing, and the thought of getting home sooner, of curling into bed before the day truly began, was too tempting to ignore. She inhaled. Fine. Charlie didn't look triumphant, didn't gloat. He just unlocked the door. Diane slid in, pressing herself against the leather seat, suddenly very aware of the space between them. The scent of expensive cologne clung to the air, something rich but not overpowering. The car was too quiet, insulated from the outside world in a way that felt almost unnatural. She buckled her seatbelt. Charlie pulled away from the curb. For the first few minutes, neither of them spoke. The city blurred past them, the neon lights fading into the pale beginnings of morning. Diane shifted, clearing her throat. "You work late?" Charlie hummed, his focus still on the road. "Investors' dinner. They love to talk. I'm expected to listen." She smirked slightly. "Sounds thrilling." "Unbearably." Diane glanced at him, surprised by the wry edge to his voice. He wasn't just saying it, he meant it. She leaned her head back against the seat, suddenly too tired to filter herself. "You ever get bored of it?" Charlie's hands tightened briefly around the wheel, but his expression remained composed. "Sometimes." She waited, expecting him to elaborate, but he didn't. Instead, he said, "You?" She blinked. "Me?" "Front desk. Do you like it?" Diane exhaled, staring at the road ahead. "It's different." "Different good or different bad?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know yet." Charlie nodded like he understood, and for some reason she believed he did. The rest of the drive was easy. They drifted into casual conversation, trivial things, music, the strangest guests she had encountered so far, her weird ability to guess coffee orders on sight. Charlie seemed amused by that. "So, if I walked in tomorrow morning, you'd know what I'd want?" Diane smirked. "I already know what you drink." He glanced at her, intrigued. "Yeah?" "Black. No sugar. No nonsense." Charlie huffed a quiet laugh. "That obvious?" Diane grinned. "You have CEO energy." Charlie shook his head, but the ghost of a smile lingered. Before she knew it, they were pulling up in front of her apartment building, and standing right outside the door, arms crossed, looking half asleep but entirely smug, was Terry. Diane's stomach dropped. "Oh no!" Charlie followed her gaze. "Who's that?" Diane groaned, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "My little brother, and he's going to—" Before she could finish, Terry leaned against the doorway, squinting dramatically at the car. Then his eyes widened, his mouth curling into a devastatingly mischievous grin. "Oh," he drawled, stretching like he had just woken up. "So this is why you're late." Diane froze. Terry tapped his chin in mock thought. Mysterious black car, expensive suit, late-night rendezvous. I see what's happening here. Charlie let out a sharp laugh. Diane turned to glare at him, mortified. Don't encourage him. But Charlie was still grinning, the kind of unguarded, real amusement she hadn't seen from him before. "I wouldn't dare." Terry wiggled his eyebrows. "Does he have a name, or should I just call him Secret Boyfriend?" Diane wanted to disappear. Charlie, for his part, just looked thoroughly entertained. She practically lunged out of the car, grabbing Terry by the collar and dragging him inside. "Go to bed. Right now." Terry laughed, unbothered. "You're blushing, by the way." She slammed the door shut. Outside, Charlie shook his head, still chuckling as he pulled away. It had been a long time since he had laughed like that, and for some reason, he knew it wouldn't be the last. The morning was crisp, the sky tinged with the pale blue of early daylight as students gathered at the school parking lot, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Terry stood near the bus, his backpack slung over one shoulder, shifting excitedly on his feet. Diane crouched slightly, straightening the collar of his jacket before pulling his beanie over his ears. "Remember, don't wander off from the group. Stay close to your teacher, okay?" Terry groaned, rolling his eyes. "Diane, I'm not a baby." She smirked, giving his beanie a playful tug. "I know, but humor me." He huffed, but grinned. "Fine. I promise not to get lost in the wilderness." Diane stood, crossing her arms. "And don't get into any trouble." Terry gave her an exaggerated salute. "No trouble. Got it." She eyed him suspiciously before ruffling his hair. "All right, go. Have fun." Terry beamed, jogging toward his group, turning only once to wave, before disappearing onto the bus. Diane exhaled. She was glad he was getting this break, a chance to be a normal kid for a little while. He deserved that. Glancing at the time, she cursed under her breath before sprinting toward the subway station. Her shift at the hotel started soon, and she couldn't afford to be late. The school trip had started well enough. The park was wide and open, the air fresh, the lake gleaming under the autumn sun. Terry had spent most of the morning enjoying the hikes, listening to his teacher's enthusiastic nature facts and messing around with his classmates. But the mood shifted when they broke for lunch. It started small, just a few boys laughing under their breath. "Man, your sister must be crazy tired all the time. Scrubbing toilets for a living." Terry stiffened. Another boy smirked, nudging his friend. "I mean, you don't even have parents. Guess she's stuck with you." Laughter rippled through the group. Terry's fists clenched. He felt the familiar burn in his chest, the weight of every whispered comment he had ignored in the past. He knew Diane worked herself to the bone for him. He knew how much she gave up. But hearing them say it, mocking her, made his blood boil. "Shut up," he snapped. The boys only laughed harder. "What, can't handle the truth?" Terry lunged before he could think twice, shoving, grabbing. The scuffle was clumsy and chaotic, a blur of limbs and angry words. Someone tripped, someone yelled, and then suddenly Terry's foot slipped, and he was falling. The cold shock of water ripped the air from his lungs. Panic surged as the lake swallowed him whole. He thrashed, kicking wildly, but the weight of his soaked clothes dragged him down. He clawed toward the surface, gasping, but water rushed into his mouth, burning his throat. He couldn't breathe. Everything was a blur of cold and noise and sinking, until strong arms yanked him up. The next few moments passed in jagged flashes, teachers shouting, kids crowding around, his lungs heaving as he coughed up water. Then the sirens. Diane's shift was in full swing when her phone rang. She barely glanced at it before answering, balancing the receiver between her ear and shoulder while typing into the hotel system. "Hello? Ms. Warren?" The voice on the other end was firm, urgent. "This is Nurse Callahan from Westford General. Your brother has been admitted." Diane's breath stopped. Everything else, the hotel, the guests, the constant hum of background noise, faded into a dull, meaningless void. What happened?" she managed, her voice a whisper. "There was an accident during his school trip. He fell into the lake. He's stable now, but he needs you here." She didn't hear the rest. The phone nearly slipped from her hand. I need to go," she blurted, already moving away from the desk. Kathleen, who had been passing by, turned at the sudden panic in Diane's voice. "What's wrong?" "My brother, he's in the hospital. I have to go." Kathleen's face softened slightly, nodding. "Go. I'll handle things here." Diane barely heard her. She was already out the door. Finding a taxi during rush hour was a nightmare. She paced frantically on the sidewalk, waving at every passing cab, but each one was either occupied or speeding past without stopping. Her hands shook as she dialed the hospital again, desperate for an update. Her mind spun with worst-case scenarios. Was he hurt? Did he hit his head? What if... A familiar car pulled up beside her. The window was lowered. Charlie. He barely looked at her before speaking. "Get in." Diane didn't question it. She threw open the door, climbing in, barely catching her breath before he was already merging into traffic. Charlie's gaze flicked toward her briefly. "Hospital?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "Terry. He fell into the lake. I don't know how bad." Her voice broke. Charlie's fingers tightened around the wheel. "He'll be okay." The words weren't empty reassurance. They were steady, certain. Diane closed her eyes for half a second, trying to steady her breathing. The ride to the hospital was too long and too fast all at once. When they arrived, Diane was out of the car before it even fully stopped. She ran inside, barely registering the nurses as she reached the front desk. "Terry Warren? Where is he?" The nurse looked up. "Room 206, down the hall." Diane sprinted. When she burst into the room, Terry was sitting up in bed, small and pale, a hospital blanket draped over his shoulders. The sight of him, awake, breathing, knocked the air from her lungs. She rushed to his side, hands framing his face. "Terry." He gave her a weak smile. "Hey, Di." She let out a shuddering breath, pressing a kiss to his damp hair. "What were you thinking?" Terry's smile faded slightly. He looked away. "They said," his throat bobbed, "they said that I'm an orphan and you were stuck with me, that you didn't have a life because of me. They mock your work. And I can't." Diane's chest ached. She gripped his hand. "Listen to me. I don't regret a single thing, okay? You're my family. Nothing changes that." Terry blinked rapidly, nodding. A presence shifted near the door. Diane turned, realizing for the first time that Charlie had followed her inside. He stood there, hands in his pockets, his gaze unreadable. But there was something in the way he was looking at them, something that made Diane's throat tighten. He had heard everything, and for the first time, she saw it, the understanding in his eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Diane exhaled, her grip on Terry tightening. Somehow she knew this moment would change everything. The hospital corridors hummed with a sterile quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against the skin, heavy with exhaustion and unspoken worries. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and cold air conditioning, a stark contrast to the weight settling in Diane's chest. Terry had fallen asleep an hour ago, his breathing even. The slow rise and fall of his chest, the only thing grounding her. She had stayed by his bedside, fingers absently smoothing his blanket, until the nurse finally coaxed her out for some air. Now she sat on a bench just outside the room, arms loosely folded over her lap, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor. Charlie was beside her, silent. He hadn't left after driving her here, hadn't made an excuse to step away once Terry was confirmed to be stable. He had stayed, watching quietly, leaning against the doorway as Diane reassured her brother, listening to every word that had slipped between them. Diane exhaled, her fingers tightening around her forearm. "You didn't have to stay." Charlie tilted his head slightly, considering. "I know." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it didn't feel heavy. For once, Diane wasn't worried about filling the space. After a beat, she let out a dry laugh, the sound more tired than anything else. "This is probably the worst impression you could have of my life, huh?" Charlie arched a brow. "Because you're at a hospital, exhausted, looking after your brother?" "Because I'm—" She hesitated, then shook her head, gesturing vaguely at the situation. "This." Charlie's gaze didn't waver. "I don't think less of you, if that's what you're asking." Diane let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "It's just a lot sometimes." Charlie leaned back against the bench, stretching out his legs slightly. "Tell me about it." Diane gave him a side glance. "About what?" "Whatever you want," he said simply. She hesitated. No one ever really asked her that. She swallowed, her hands tightening into fists in her lap. "I had to drop out of university," she started, her voice quiet. "I was studying hospitality management. Pretty ironic, right?" Charlie didn't react, letting her talk. "My parents—" She inhaled sharply. "They died in a car accident. It was sudden. One second we were a family, and the next, it was just me and Terry." Her voice wavered, but she pushed through. "I tried to stay in school at first, but it wasn't realistic. Tuition was too much, and there was no one else to take care of him. So I left." Charlie's expression remained neutral, but there was something in his eyes, something unreadable yet understanding. She let out a humorless chuckle. "I thought I'd just take a break, work for a while, save up, and go back. But 1 year turned into 2, then 3, and suddenly I was just surviving." Charlie's fingers tapped lightly against his knee, thoughtful. "And now?" Diane exhaled, tilting her head back against the wall. Now, I don't even know if going back is an option. Charlie was quiet for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he said, "You remind me of someone." Diane turned her head slightly, curious. Charlie didn't look at her when he spoke next, his voice unusually even. "My mother was a professor, brilliant woman, loved what she did. But my father..." He paused, then exhaled. He didn't believe in slowing down. He built an empire, and he expected me to follow the same path. Work harder, be better, never stop. Diane watched him carefully, noting the way his jaw tightened slightly. "For a long time, I did exactly that," Charlie continued. "But I never realized how exhausting it was until I looked around and realized I had nothing outside of it. Just work, just expectations." Diane blinked, surprised. She had never once considered that someone like Charlie Coleman could understand what it felt like to run on borrowed time. Charlie let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "The first time I saw you, you were sleeping on a toilet." Diane groaned, burying her face in her hands. "God, don't remind me." Charlie smirked. "I should have fired you for that." She peeked at him through her fingers. "Why didn't you?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know." But Diane had a feeling he did. A moment passed before she shook her head, laughing softly. "I can't believe you just admitted that was the first time you saw me." Charlie smirked. It was memorable. Diane rolled her eyes, but couldn't fight the small smile tugging at her lips. For the first time in a long while, the exhaustion felt lighter. Charlie leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "Diane." She glanced at him, brows raised. "You're not just surviving." His voice was firm, certain. "You're doing more than that." Diane stared at him, her throat tightening unexpectedly. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. And for now, that was enough. Diane never expected anything from people like Charlie Coleman. So when Kathleen pulled her aside in the middle of her shift, her stomach tightened. "You need to go up to the executive office," Kathleen said, adjusting the stack of files in her arms. "Mr. Coleman wants to see you." Diane blinked. "Did I..." She hesitated. "Did I do something wrong?" Kathleen gave her a pointed look. "Not that I know of. Just go." Diane exhaled slowly, wiped her hands on her skirt, and made her way to the top floor. She'd only been up here once, to drop off a lost item. The air felt different, quieter, heavier. The hallways stretched wide, decorated with muted paintings, the scent of expensive cologne lingering faintly in the space. When she reached the glass doors of Charlie's office, she hesitated for half a second before knocking. "Come in." She stepped inside. Charlie was behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, a few documents spread out before him. His suit jacket was draped over the chair, and his tie was slightly loosened, as if he'd had a long day but wasn't done yet. He looked up, eyes flickering over her before he leaned back in his chair. "Have a seat." Diane hesitated again, but obeyed, sinking into the plush leather chair across from him. "You've been at this hotel for how long now?" Charlie asked, lacing his fingers together. Diane swallowed. "Almost a year. You started as a cleaner. Then you moved to the front desk, and from what I've seen, you've done exceptionally well in both roles." Diane frowned slightly. Thank you." Charlie didn't look away. "You mentioned once that you dropped out of university." Her stomach dropped. Yeah, she admitted cautiously. "And you were studying hospitality management." Diane stiffened. She hadn't expected that detail to stick with him. Charlie reached for a folder, sliding it across the desk toward her. "I want you to go back." Diane blinked. "What?" "A part-time program," Charlie said smoothly, "while still working here. I've arranged for you to be considered for our Employee Development Scholarship. The hotel will cover most of the tuition." Diane's hands curled around the armrest of the chair. She felt overwhelmed, like the world had just tilted off its axis. "Why?" The word left her lips before she could stop it. Charlie's gaze remained steady. "Because you earned it." Diane let out a breath, shaking her head slightly. I can't accept that. It's too much. I don't want—" "Charity," Charlie finished, raising a brow. Diane hesitated. "Yeah. This isn't charity," he said firmly. "It's an investment in someone who deserves a chance." Diane pressed her lips together. Her entire life, she had worked for every single thing she had. And now, something was being handed to her. No strings, no expectation of repayment. And she didn't know how to handle it. Charlie must have seen the conflict on her face because he leaned forward slightly. "Let me ask you something," he said. "If someone else in your position was given this opportunity, would you tell them to turn it down?" Diane bit the inside of her cheek. "Number, of course not." Charlie sat back. "Then don't be a hypocrite." Diane stared at him, startled. Then, against all odds, a laugh broke free from her chest. Charlie smirked. There it is. Diane inhaled deeply, trying to gather her thoughts. This was real. This was happening. And if she said yes, her life could change. "Okay," she said softly. Then stronger. "Okay. I'll do it." Charlie's expression didn't shift, but something in his posture relaxed. "Good." That evening, when Diane burst through the apartment door, Terry was mid-bite in a peanut butter sandwich. She barely gave him a chance to swallow before grabbing his face with both hands. "I'm going back to school," Terry choked. "You're what?" Diane grinned. "Part-time. I still get to work, but I'm finishing my degree." Terry stared. Then, he threw his arms in the air. "Yes! This is the best news ever!" He jumped onto the couch, fist-pumping the air. "My sister's going to be a college student again. We have to celebrate. Oh my God, can I tell people you're in school? Can I tell the kids at my school that my sister is educated?" Diane rolled her eyes, laughing. "Yes, you can tell people." Terry gasped dramatically. "We need cake." Diane shook her head. "I'll get takeout instead." Terry grinned. "Double fries." Diane smirked. "Double fries." He cheered, and as Diane pulled out her phone to place the order, she realized something. For the first time in years, she was excited about what came next. The shift in their relationship was so subtle that Diane barely noticed it at first. Charlie had always been present in her life in a professional capacity, watching from afar, an occasional conversation at work. But after the hospital, after the scholarship, something changed. It started with the little things, the occasional check-ins that didn't feel like orders, just casual curiosity. "How's the coursework going?" "Are you handling the late-night shifts okay?" Then came the unspoken favors. A coffee was waiting at the front desk when she had early classes. A new notebook appeared in the break room on the same day she mentioned running out of paper. And then, somehow, he just became part of her life. One evening, she came home to find Charlie Coleman in her living room, sitting at the tiny dining table, helping Terry with his math homework. Diane froze in the doorway. Terry barely looked up. "Oh, hey, Di, Charlie's a math wizard." Charlie didn't glance away from the problem set he was reviewing. "Not really. I just understand numbers." Diane narrowed her eyes. "How did you even get in here?" Terry pointed at him with a pencil. "He knocked. I let him in. You're late, by the way." Diane scoffed. Of course, Terry had no problem inviting a near stranger into their home. Charlie finally glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "You don't look thrilled." "Because this is weird." Charlie smirked. "You say weird. I say convenient." Diane groaned, dropping her bag by the couch. "This is temporary. You're not making this a habit." But it became a habit. Charlie started appearing more, casual drop-ins, weekend meals where he brought expensive takeout, and sat on the floor with Terry, discussing the best burger joints in town like they were debating stock investments. Diane tried to fight it, tried to keep him at arm's length. But the lines had already started blurring. It wasn't just Charlie, the CEO, anymore. It was Charlie, the man who helped Terry with his math. Charlie, the man who noticed when she was overwhelmed. Charlie, the man who understood what it felt like to carry things alone. One night, as they sat at the table, finishing up another meal he had sneakily paid for, Diane leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. She studied him for a moment. "Why are you doing this?" Charlie, who had just taken a sip of wine, arched a brow. "Doing what?" She gestured vaguely. "This, the dinners, the tutoring, the being here." He set his glass down, his expression unreadable. "Does it bother you?" Diane hesitated. She wanted to say yes, that it was strange, that she wasn't used to this, to help that didn't come with conditions. But when she opened her mouth, the words didn't come. Charlie watched her, waiting, and something about his patience, his refusal to push for an answer, made her exhale. "It just feels new." Charlie nodded. "Then let's call it that." Diane's lips twitched. "That's not an answer." He smirked. "I know. And the worst part? She didn't mind. Not anymore." The university hall was alive with the sounds of celebration, cheers, laughter, the occasional burst of applause as another graduate crossed the stage. Diane stood among her fellow graduates, the weight of her cap pressing lightly against her head, fingers tightening around the rolled diploma in her hands. She had done it. For years, she had convinced herself this moment might never come. That finishing her degree was something meant for other people, not for someone like her, someone who had spent so long just trying to survive. But here she was, standing in the middle of a crowd in her graduation robes, the culmination of every sleepless night, every shift worked, every sacrifice made. She took a steadying breath as the final names were called, her heart still racing from the moment she had walked across that stage, her name announced to the entire auditorium. From the stands, she had spotted Terry, practically bouncing in his seat, his face beaming with pride. And beside him, Charlie, cool, composed, but there. Always there. Diane didn't allow herself to dwell on what that meant. As the ceremony concluded, students spilled out onto the campus lawn, where families and friends eagerly searched for their graduates. Diane maneuvered through the crowd, her eyes scanning for one particular duo. She barely had time to react before Terry crashed into her. "You did it!" he shouted, hugging her tight. "You're officially smart." Diane let out a choked laugh, squeezing him back. "Was I not smart before?" "You were, but now it's official." She ruffled his hair, warmth flooding her chest. "Thanks, kid." A quiet clearing of a throat made her turn. Charlie stood just a step away, hands in his pockets, watching her with something unreadable in his gaze. "Well?" Diane smirked. "Did I pass your expectations?" Charlie tilted his head slightly. "You passed them a long time ago." Her breath caught just a little. Terry, oblivious to the shift in tension, grinned up at Charlie. "She worked so hard for this." Charlie's expression softened, something quiet settling in his features. "Yeah," he said. "She did." Diane looked away, feeling an odd flutter in her chest. "This is dangerous," she thought. "Whatever this is, it's dangerous." Before she could say anything, a familiar voice interrupted. "There you are, Diane." Diane turned, blinking in surprise as Michelle Coleman approached, her professor, her thesis advisor, her mentor. Diane had spent the past year working under Michelle's mentorship, her professor, her advisor, the one who had guided her through her thesis, the one who had encouraged her when she doubted herself. "Professor," Diane said, startled. Michelle smiled warmly, eyes filled with something knowing. "Congratulations. I told you you'd make it." Diane was still processing her presence when Charlie suddenly stepped forward. "Mom." Diane's world tilted. Her stomach dropped. Her professor, Michelle Coleman, was Charlie's mother. Charlie's mother. The realization hit like a crashing wave, and suddenly everything made sense. The support, the encouragement, the subtle guidance. Michelle had known, had always known. She had pushed Diane, challenged her, believed in her not just as a student, but as someone she had already connected to her son. Diane felt like she couldn't breathe. Michelle's gaze was warm, unreadable. "I wondered how long it would take you to figure it out." Diane swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. "You knew?" Michelle's smile deepened. "Of course I knew." Diane stared. Terry looked between them, utterly lost. Wait. So, let me get this straight. Your professor is Charlie's mum?" Diane couldn't respond. Charlie, ever composed, let out a quiet exhale. "Yeah." Terry's eyes widened. "Whoa!" Diane finally found her voice. "You never said anything." Michelle's expression softened. "Would it have changed how hard you worked?" Diane froze. No, it wouldn't have. Michelle stepped closer, resting a gentle hand on Diane's shoulder. "I was always going to support you, Diane. Not because of Charlie, but because of you." Diane's throat tightened. Her mind was still catching up, still processing, but all she could do was nod. Michelle squeezed her shoulder once before stepping back, seamlessly transitioning into conversation with Terry, asking him about school, his hobbies, his plans, now that his sister was a college graduate. And Diane? She stood there, still reeling, still trying to understand what this meant. When she finally glanced at Charlie, he was already looking at her. He didn't say anything, didn't need to, because for the first time, Diane saw everything clearly, and it terrified her. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the university courtyard, where graduates and their families gathered for photos, laughter, and teary-eyed goodbyes. Diane stood in the middle of it all, still reeling from the past hour. She was a graduate. The weight of the diploma in her hands felt surreal. Terry had barely let go of her since the ceremony ended, beaming with so much pride that he practically radiated excitement. And Charlie, he had remained close, his presence steady, his gaze watchful, as if he understood just how much this moment meant to her. And then, of course, there was Michelle Coleman. Diane still hadn't quite wrapped her head around it. Her mentor, her professor, Charlie's mother. It was ridiculous, almost laughable, that she hadn't figured it out sooner. But now, standing between the three of them, the truth felt less like a shock and more like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Diane took a breath and turned to Michelle. "I don't even know what to say." Michelle's eyes twinkled. "You don't have to say anything, just know I'm proud of you." Diane's throat tightened. Proud. That word had weight. For so long, her achievements had been her own. No one had ever really celebrated them. Not like this. And now, here she was. With them. Terry, who had been her reason to keep going. Charlie, who had given her a chance when she thought she had none. And Michelle, who had believed in her before she ever believed in herself. She had people. She had family. "All right, picture time," Terry suddenly announced, pulling at Diane's arm. "Come on, Di, this is important." Diane laughed, shaking her head. Fine. Let's take a picture." They huddled together. Terry squished between Diane and Charlie, his grin too big for the camera. Michelle stood beside them, elegant and poised, but her smile was just as warm. And then, just as the camera clicked, Charlie did something unexpected. He turned toward Diane, and he said, "I love you." The words were soft, but clear. Diane's breath caught. Her heart stopped. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it, that maybe the overwhelming emotions of the day had made her hear things. But when she turned, Charlie was still looking at her, his expression open, certain, steady. She wasn't imagining it. He had said it, and he meant it. Terry let out a dramatic gasp. "Oh my God, he just confessed." Michelle chuckled. Well, it was about time. Diane's mind spun. Charlie didn't move, didn't waver, didn't take it back. He just waited. Diane swallowed. Her chest felt too tight, her emotions too much. But beneath the whirlwind, there was clarity. Because somewhere along the way, between the long nights and quiet moments, between the laughter and the unspoken understanding, she had fallen for him too. She loved him, and she had no reason, no desire to pretend otherwise. So she took a breath, and she smiled. "I love you too," Terry whooped. Michelle sighed, but she was smiling, and Charlie, he just exhaled, like he had known all along, like he had been waiting for this moment. And as they stood there, the camera capturing the four of them together, a new kind of family forming, Diane realized something. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just looking toward the future. She was ready for it. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.